Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me today in my presentation. Today, we're going to be discussing the tough on crime era, what exactly the tough on crime era was. We're going to be giving you some context and discussing the importance of some of the problems that the tough on crime era produced, some of the consequences of the tough on crime era, some examples of tough on crime era policy, its effects, and some of the policy recommendations for the future. So, what exactly is the tough on crime era? Well, picture the 1970s. Big cities such as New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, Seattle are becoming riddled with crime, and people want solutions. In such a short period of time, the murder rates increased, robberies increased, and rapes, as well as many more crimes, increased dramatically. In fact, in 1970, over 5 million major crimes were reported in the United States, which was 1 million more than the year prior. The violent crime rate saw an increase of 126% in the United States between 1960 and 1970, and a 64% increase between 1970 and 1980. These obviously aren't small numbers. Such great increases had people shocked, scared, and searching for solutions. So what they did was turn to their politicians, their leaders, their mayors for change. The politicians decided to take action and crack down on criminals and criminal activity. This is what birthed the Tough on Crime movement. The Tough on Crime movement was essentially a period of time between the 1970s and the 1990s that were filled with stringent criminal code, longer sentencing, tough laws, and other harsh approaches meant to curb crime through incarceration and other harsh punishments up to and including death. Now, the intentions of the tough on crime era are somewhat obvious and laudable. The intention of the tough on crime era movement was pretty clear. It was to curb crime and deter criminals from acting. The idea was with tougher consequences, criminals would become deterred from acting on their intentions and would lower crime rates, creating a safer environment for the everyday civilian. The assumption was that criminals or people who were thinking about committing criminal acts would see the tougher consequences and decide not to act. Unfortunately, things don't always go as planned, and there are a lot of consequences that came from the tough on crime era policies. Now, let's talk about a few examples of tough on crime policy and a little bit of why they failed. The first example, and one of the best examples of tough on crime policy, are three-strike laws. Three-strike laws exist in multiple states throughout the country. In fact, 28 states have three-strike laws. Three-strike laws is a criminal sentencing structure in which significantly harsher punishments are imposed for repeat offenders. So the idea is that if somebody commits a crime more than once, each time it gets worse. So, according to U.S. legal, three-strike law refers to a category of statutes enacted by states beginning in the 1990s to require long periods of imprisonment for persons convicted of 3 or more felonies on separate occasions. A third felony conviction usually brings a life sentence in prison with no parole possible until a long period of time, most commonly 25 years, has been served. Different versions of three-strike laws exist both federally and throughout state law. At one point in time, California had arguably the harshest of all 3 state laws in the United States. Before 2012, any new felony, regardless of how minor, may be punished under the three-strike law if the defendant has 1 or more serious or violent felony priors. This meant that a qualifying offender could be obligated to be punished under the three strikes law for any felony such as shoplifting or reckless driving. Under this law, a shoplifter with an unfortunate past could end up serving mandatory life in prison. Determinate sentencing is another example of tough on crime policy. And this is a tough on crime policy that negatively affects the criminal justice system within the United States. According to Cornell Law School, a determinate sentence is a jail or prison sentence that has a definite length and can't be reviewed or changed by a parole board or another agency. The judge has little discretion in sentencing and must follow the sentence guidelines determined by law. Although some states have indeterminate justice systems, many still do not. Up to 17, including the District of Columbia, operate a primarily determinate sentencing system for felony offenders. One of the reasons for the implementation of determinate sentencing was that there was a rise in popularity within Congress as they were looking to deter crime in the 1980s, and many felt that mandatory minimum sentencing was the answer to keep the people of the United States safe. But has it really done this? Another example of tough on crime policy, and maybe a more broader category, are habitual offender laws. Three-strike laws fall under habitual offender laws. Habitual offender laws basically group individuals into more serious punishments based on the quantity of crimes that they have committed, not necessarily taking into account the severity of the crimes. Now that we talked about some examples of tough on crime era policy, let's talk about some of the consequences of tough on crime policy. To begin with, mass incarceration is a huge consequence, an unintended consequence of tough on crime era policy. Over the years, incarceration rates more than quadrupled due to some of these policies, and millions of people are still incarcerated from that era to this day. Another unintended consequence of the tough on crime policy era is that we now have a bloated court system and a bloated criminal justice system that is slow and unable to serve any real justice to people that need it. This bloated criminal justice system is stopping, in a sense, accused criminals and people with due process rights from being able to access quick and speedy trials and handle their cases in a timely manner. Another consequence of tough on crime policy is excessive taxpayer spending. whether it's just over $20,000 per year per inmate in South Carolina or upwards of $70,000 per year per inmate in California. This bill adds up quickly and is even quicker passed down to the average everyday taxpayer. In fact, a large part of states' budgets are allotted to paying to imprison thousands. Alabama, the state that spends the least on housing inmates, spends over $450 million per year doing so. Hawaii, a state with relatively few people imprisoned, still spends almost $200 million a year. Now, that is just the yearly cost. With habitual offender laws, these prisoners are being sentenced to 10, 20, 30, or even more years incarcerated. Some are even sentenced to life. Imagine the taxpayer cost of such operations. According to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, the US spends $81 billion a year on mass incarceration, and some even believe that figure might be an underestimate. This, of course, does not account for what families must pay. With court costs, the cost of policing, and family-paid fees, the Prison Policy Initiative found that mass incarceration costs state and federal governments and American families $100 billion more each year than previously thought. As the more than 2 million Americans incarcerated continues to increase, as more and more people fall victim to habitual offender laws, the taxpayer burden will increase as well. Another consequence of the tough on crime policy and a byproduct of mass incarceration is prison overflow. According to the International Journal of Prisoner Health, overcrowding has been one of the biggest issues for prisons for many years, and the latest data shows that 22 national prison systems hold more than double their capacity. These issues can cause health issues for inmates, where inmates are more susceptible to deadly diseases while in overcrowded facilities, and also more susceptible to violence as well. Now let's talk about some policies made to rectify the problem. At one point, the California three-strike law was considered the harshest in the United States. However, in 2012, the law was revised and reworked. Now violators must be charged and convicted of 3 felony crimes, keeping lower-level criminals relatively safe from the law. However, still more needs to be done to address three-strike laws, such as in California. Another huge initiative is the First Step Act, introduced and signed into law under President Donald Trump in 2018. According to the Department of Justice, the First Step Act of 2018 provides eligible inmates the opportunity to earn 10 to 15 days of time credits for every 30 days of successful participation in evidence-based recidivism reduction programs and productive activities. These credits are used toward early release and is applied retroactively. According to the Justice Department, many have been already released due to this act. Another president that took it upon himself to change the dynamic of their country's criminal justice system was President Barack Obama, and his administration pushed a Smart on Crime initiative. This initiative had goals such as to promote fair enforcement of the laws and alleviate disparate impacts of the criminal justice system, to ensure just punishments for low-level, nonviolent offenders. According to the Department of Justice, because of the Smart on Crime Obama-era initiative, The federal inmate population decreased from nearly 220,000 in 2013 to fewer than 190,000 in 2017. Not only that, but they state that there were fewer federal drug prosecutions overall and that more focus was applied to most serious offenders. Upon implementation of the First Step Act, over 3,000 inmates were released from incarceration, with another 1,700 having their sentences greatly reduced. There is no doubt and no denying that these policies have attempted to rectify the problem of tough on crime era policy. There's still a lot of changes to be made. Policies must reflect modern day needs. The U.S. justice system is suffering from age-old policies and needs to be reformed and pressure released. Unfair policies such as three-strike laws and mandatory sentencing should be eliminated. Judges must be given discretion at lower levels to make sentencing decisions. Drug policy also needs to be changed. Many nonviolent crimes are punished for incarceration, but that does nothing. Policies need to reflect economic impact of incarceration and morale impact as well. Policies should be given more flexibility on sentencing and consequences based on each offender's specific situation. There should be more sentencing maximums and less sentencing minimums. In conclusion, the tough on crime era, which began in the 1970s and lasted through the 1990s, was an attempt to curb an influx of crime. However, it overall failed and had many unintended consequences. Although there are many actions being taken by leaders to rectify the issue, changes must still be made. Power must be given back to the judges, and discretion must be given back to the judges. Thank you.